Hi, welcome to Power the Network. I'm your host, Tim Locker, Vice President of Broadband here at CBM. I'm very excited about our guests this week. We've got Mr. Ben Foster from Twin Valley Telephone, also ISG Technologies, and he's also been recently appointed to the director of the board for the NTCA. So we've got a lot to talk about. Looking forward to meeting him. We've met in passing over the years, but never really had a chance to sit down and get to know him. So looking forward to this conversation. Ben, thanks so much for joining us. It's great to have you in studio here today with us. I think we've probably met in passing at different trade shows or something, but I don't think we've ever sat down and chatted. So I'm excited to get to know you a little bit better. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I wanted to start off and highlight that, Twin Valley, family-owned business, fourth generation. So, you're leading the charge and have taken over the reins for quite some time now. But talk about what that family-owned business means to you as, coming up through it and growing into it.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one that I do think about, quite a bit, from time to time. But I think it all just starts with, for me, it's just like it's normal, like when I grew up, my great grandparents lived right across the street from us. Yeah. They lived to be almost 100,
Oh, wow.
So they were with us a long time. And so when we would go down, if you want to go, the town of 500, if you want to go down and see your parents or see your family, they were all at the telephone office. And so you go down there and just really kind of included the employees as part of my family and just was very natural. So kind of just grew up, always thinking I was going to go like right back into, Twin Valley and didn't even really want to go to college that bad. But my dad told me, he's like, well, you don't have to go to college. You just can't work here if you're going to do that. So it came pretty clear, that that was, well, there's some steps that I needed to take before I got there. But even when I ended up going to Southwestern Bell and, what's now AT&T, for about 8 years, always knew that my real purpose, my real why was when I wanted to come back home and make an impact in my community and for my family. So there's a lot of differences, whenever you work for your family, in terms of your shareholders and some of your members on your board. Some things that are, pressures that might not exist other places or obstacles or challenges that might exist other places, but that's honestly what makes it worth it for me. So I just, I love to work with them. They're very supportive and just love the long-term aspect, that in my particular position, being able to think long-term. And know that the family's thinking long term, thinking about the next generation, really kind of makes my job really easy when you think about it.
And I'll throw you a little bit of a curveball here. It's a tough question. If you don't want to answer it, that's fine too. But I've worked for some family-owned companies over the years, and even looking at some of my parents' experience, same thing. The first generation, the guy that starts the company, he's got a lot of respect and so on, and then the son comes in. And sometimes you see that level of respect change, like maybe he didn't earn it or he's just given this, there's always that perception. Has that been an issue for you, or is that different as it's fourth generation and not second generation?
I think it wouldn't have been different for me. I think I think that might've been I know it was part of the reason why Dad even said, like, you have to go to college, like you're not just going to work here and quote unquote do a good job, and then you have to do some things to earn it. Yeah. And I don't know that I was mature enough at the time I decided to go to AT&T to say, okay, this is going to be a way that if I can be successful here, that might be a way I can earn some respect, back at Twin Valley. I don't think I was really thinking that way necessarily until a little bit later. And then, I realized when I did come back that I'd been able to have the kind of experience that when and there's a whole bunch of this backstory, that's taking place in the midst of this. One of them is like we were a bit of a lifestyle company. Twin Valley was a way for us to work with people that shared our values, that were a lot of fun to work with. The people in our company when I was growing up were hilarious. I loved the technicians were unbelievable. I loved spending time with them and working with them. But we kind of, around the time I decided to come back, and there was an opportunity for me. Like that was about the time that the third generation, second generation wanted to make it kind of a perpetual family-owned company, and so there's some changes whenever you're going to make that kind of conscious shift in a lot of different ways, and some uncomfortable ones. But that, I think the preparation that I had at a non-family, or experience I had at a non-family company helped us kind of lead the transition to, okay, now we're going to be a really growing enterprise.
Yeah. So what are some of the lessons you learned with that time at AT&T?
Oh man, so many. I mean, like it was, I was so naive with looking back. I went in there thinking, I always grew up, and I still believe this. I mean, like the telecommunication industry is special, and like there's special people that work there. Because growing up, you go to the state associations and you see all the different characters, and they were really always friendly to young people and just very inclusive, kind of industry and family. So I thought naively that that's just how the telephone industry was. So I go to Southwestern Bell and discover, that there are some union people there, and it's just a different thing. I thought that, they just needed a little bit of, hey, we can make this into a Twin Valley kind of group, and everything's gonna be awesome.
Yeah.
I got an education that's not exactly what exactly they wanted to do. Some of them. So it was. I learned about how that I had to motivate people differently than that I had. You don't have to motivate people at Twin Valley. They were self-motivated. That's how I grew up. So it started to give me some skills and lessons about how to start connecting with people and really intentionally figuring out like what makes them tick, like, and try to, in a union environment, even like what do you want? I'm limited on, what kind of perks I can give you, and things got to be equal by the contract. But I can really still figure out on an individual basis, what are the little things I can change to help support you when you do a great job. And if you need some help, in some different areas, what are some things I can do there?
In terms of motivating people, do you find that it's different for everybody, or is there maybe a general rule that you've put together, or you got to figure everybody out separately?
So, I believe, at the core of it, you have to figure out individuals. I mean, like and then at the same time, I think you have standards that you're always there. So like I don't believe we should sacrifice our standards for anyone. Like if you have like, this is what I want to achieve, and this is where the business needs to go, and the values I want to have in our team to get there. Like those are kind of non-negotiable. Like that's the standard. Yeah. But then it becomes like, so what are we as a group going to do? What are we as an individuals going to do? And that's where I think you do have to spend some time and say, what kind of leader do you want to be? Like what role do you want to have in that? And people are different, if you try, and I've tried, I've made all the mistakes, I've tried to manage them all the same way because I just felt like I didn't have time. And at the end of the day, that doesn't work. So for me, what works is I find people I want to work with, that I want to discover. I do want to help you with your personal goals because I like you and we share the same values. And that's when teams really do some pretty cool things. Yeah.
So what are a couple of your key principles?
I think, I guess I probably don't have it like boiled down into principles. I mean, I think the people, the teams that I have now, and they're fantastic teams. They believe in values first. Like if you're not like hiring based on values, if you're not promoting people based on values, if you're not disciplining people, on values, then it's really fake. And people see it through it like just that fast. They'll look at your value statement and they'll see really quickly in that the first meeting, if somebody's there and they're clearly not aligned with your values, that they don't believe in it. So like that's non-negotiable for me. People, at the end of the day, we've got all this technology, all these distractions, all these things going on. There's really not that many places around that are larger companies that truly do run the business based on values. So when we think about like growth and the kind of people we need to attract and all those things, I mean, that's one of our biggest differentiators. Like we're serious, we believe we're serious about it.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the number one. And then the second one is the business needs to achieve certain things, and we all have a role that we have to play in that, and this goes back to the kind of right person, right seat. You can't, at one time if I liked people or we liked people, sometimes we would invent seats for people to be in that you maybe didn't really need. And then, that causes kind of issues in there. So at the end of the day, it's like the values, and then make sure you've got the seats identified, clear accountability about people that can get things done that you need to get done to achieve your, I like to look at 3 years in the future and put that person in there. And if they're not on a trend toward, kind of getting there, then you got to work really hard with them, and eventually they'll get there. Or if they see everybody else has these kind of standards, and it's not me setting the standards. A lot of times it's my team setting the standards. Then they eventually kind of move to a different team, on their own. So that's kind of like if you could boil things down to like kind of a couple of areas, like if you just stay really disciplined about it, which is really easy to say and harder to do. Yeah.
That's the tough thing. Discipline's the hard part.
It is. It really is. Because I say it, and even when that happens, you make rationalizations and a little bit more time. This one thing happened and that other thing happened, and it's easy to kind of put it off.
So you seem very growth oriented. Obviously, that's important in any company. Going back, 4 generations to now, what's a couple things that's consistent and still the same in terms of those values, and what is something that's maybe different now than when your great grandpa was at the helm?
Yep. It is the values are the same. I think I could quickly kind of describe the process by which we discerned our values. It wasn't, kind of doing word clouds out there and figuring out what we thought sounded the best or anything like that. What we did was say, okay, as we look back, who are the people in our company today? Who are people in our company, previously that, if you had to go to war with them, they'd be part of your team out of all of them that are out there, and then tell a story about why. And so we started telling stories about, current employees and previous employees about why we thought they would be the ones that we'd want to pick on our team. And then you start putting all those stories together, and that's when you start discerning, value. So, one of our values is lead by example. And one of the, there's many stories. My great grandpa, after he worked outside till he was 73. And then Grandpa Jack, decided it was time for my great grandpa to come back in because he was kind of getting in the way of things, but all the guys were scared to tell him that. So Joe didn't really like it, but he decided to come in to start doing dishes. He would come down for coffee, and after the coffee was over, he would do dishes. Mick Hamill, just one of the technicians, would come in before work. He'd come in like at 4:35 in the morning, something ridiculous, and he would empty out all the trash, before everybody came in, made sure all the trash got done. Yeah. And so, it's not about what I learned from that is like all of this work is important. It doesn't matter what your role is. Like it has to get done. Somebody has to do it, and if they don't do it, then it all falls apart. And so that's just an example, one example or two examples, but those the values. It's important that we have stories, to go along with those values. What's changed is a lot. That's really been kind of the challenge that I was mentioning. When you're a family-owned company, you make that leap that you're going to go and hopefully be a perpetual, kind of company. You have to do 2 things. You have to do one thing. You have to continue to create reasons that your family wants to share capital with each other. I mean, at some point, everybody could just sell and just take their piece and just go home, right, and do their own thing. Yeah. And so you have to, we have to figure out ways reasons we want to share capital together. And one of those is obviously there's a financial component, to that.
Sure.
And so everybody could take their piece, put in the S&P 500, get their 10 or 11%. If they wanted to liquidate it, they could liquidate it, and that would be real easy, right, and less risky. So that's where a lot of our business goals come from. We have to do better than that. We have to do than the S&P 500. So just on a pure financial basis,
sure.
That's kind of where just the business part kind of comes in from how we set our goals. On the family part, that's where we are really intentional. It's probably the number one thing we're working on as a shareholder group is what kind of lessons do we want to teach our family? Like we want them to come together and figure out how to be owners. We know they're not all going to work in the business the way previous generations did, right? So we're creating ways and that they can connect with the business, that they can learn great life lessons, that they can contribute to their communities differently as owners if they choose not to work in the business. And that's what we're working on, because the financial stuff by itself won't be enough. You have to kind of help them build relationships and do those kinds of things.
Yeah. What types of things does Twin Valley do in the communities? Whether it's booster club activities or whatever. What types of things do you guys participate at the local level?
I mean, you name it. I mean, there's sponsoring little league teams. If there's grant opportunities going, that we try and encourage. We're on a lot of the economic development group boards in different counties that we're in. So they're always looking for, projects and grants from other places. So we like to support, football stadiums. One of the cool things we did recently that I had a lot of fun with was we sponsored an esports team in Junction City. And so this is one of their kind of community groups. They've got a fantastic guy named Aaron Sheltdown that started this group, and I didn't even know anything about it. Like my team found this group and decided, let's go ahead and start sponsoring their esports arena and their team. And so I found out about it. I didn't even have anything to do with it. And the team did it, and I loved it. I thought it was a great idea.
What was the game? Do you remember?
They did. So it was Call of Duty. A bunch of them. I think there's Call of Duty. I remember that one because that's the one I actually know how to play a little bit. The other ones, I can't quite remember.
I was at I believe it was a volleyball tournament that my daughter was in. If I remember correctly, I was in the Nevada High School in Nevada, Iowa, and there was a banner, a state championship. It was Mario Kart state champions.
Oh, really?
And I'm like, what in the world? And that's the first I'd ever seen or heard of it. But it's crazy what they're doing now.
If they had like a Tecmo Bowl, deal, I might be able to get Bo Jackson, and I could win that one. But I mean, the games they play now, it's like I just can't even believe the way they're doing it. Like they let me play Call of Duty with them, and they were, of course, they introduced me as the president of Twin Valley. So these kids were all like, there's Mr. President. So they decided, Mr. President, get behind us. They decided they were going to be like, protect me, because ultimately they didn't want me to die. And so they would surround me. They wouldn't let me, they'd almost build walls around me so I couldn't get out and try. I was like, guys, I want to try and get somebody, And so I had a great time with those kids, but they are learning production skills. One of them is they're trying to do things like this and trying to build into a Twitch community where they're streaming and creating content and things like that. So of course they're doing gaming and having a good time and building some relationships there. But Aaron is really also, having them start learning about production, kind of techniques. So just really cool, with what they're doing there. So that's another one that I think just was more recent that I really connected with. But it's the parades. I mean, it's all of them just being visible, on and making sure we're giving back to the community that supports us.
What is your message for kids now? It's totally different than when you and I were kids, but even just coming into the workforce, there's millions of different ways to make a dollar, these days. What's your message to, somebody coming out of high school or out of college?
Well, I mean, so I got kids in high school now, and man, it's tough. I mean, the things that, I mean, there's always going to be a place for values, being honest and hard work. That's timeless, and I think hopefully it always stays timeless. But it feels like that these kids are going to have to, obviously they're going to have to learn about technology and AI, and sort of figure out like, how do I build these businesses without very many people, and like that's, there's going to be a lot of resources out there. And so I tell my kids, like, you have to figure out AI. You have to use that in a lot of different things. I mean, like, different schools have different policies about like what it should be. And I kind of find myself nodding on both sides of the debate. Like they need to learn critical thinking skills on their own. Absolutely. And they also need to learn how to use AI to not just, some of the memorization things we have to do. Maybe that's been part of our education system needs to change. But I tell them, like, my view is like, you have to learn how to be potentially a serial entrepreneur. Like maybe you have an idea, let's spin up your business. If you can work, 5, if it's relevant for 5 years, 6 years, and maybe that's a great business, then you start up a new one. You know? So I don't know. It's really just changing really fast. But I think at the end of the day, you have to know customer service. You have to know who your customers are, what problem you're solving, for them. Make sure you've got your values out there, and then be very nimble, I think. Yeah.
Creativity for one, certainly. Follow those hunches, I guess.
Fail fast. If it doesn't work, then move on. Yeah.
That's probably the biggest lesson I've learned, was when I was younger, not taking those risks. I think, that's the time to do it. You have plenty of time to recover, less responsibility. There's always, that's what parents are for, to, pick you up when you get knocked down, right?
How would you teach your kids? I was the same way. Like I put entrepreneurs like up here because they're willing to take those risks, and I was never comfortable doing that.
It's a challenge to teach your kids when they don't listen.
Exactly.
But looking back, I came out of high school, went right into construction. And I always had an itch to, get into rental property. I just never had the money to do it. I had the itch, but not the scratch. But I probably, if I really, really forced myself, I probably could have made it work somehow. And 30 years ago would have been a much better time to start buying real estate than today. Yeah. And so that's one of the things that I kind of, sticks back in me, that I. Maybe not a regret, but probably something I'd be way better off had I pursued it.
Yep.
I think, I have a son who just graduated from Iowa State last year. He's getting married this summer. It's like me all over again. That's just. But I didn't listen that well to my dad. He doesn't listen that well to me. You got to. Some people just want to find out the hard way. If you could, my advice would be, if you could just learn from the mistakes I've made, and just believe me that it's true, and not have to find out for yourself. You'd be further along. So that's my advice. Learn from the people that are trying to teach you. There's a reason, there's a reason they're trying to give you whatever that advice is.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. CBM is a manufacturer's rep based right here in Kansas City. We've got territory where we cover from Iowa all the way down to Texas. We cover specifically 3 different market segments: utility, commercial industrial, and broadband communications. CBM is structured differently. We're an employee-owned company. We're ran as an ESOP. That allows us to do business differently. We can cross lines of markets. We can put our people where they need to be and really have expertise in the right place. That's what makes a difference, for our customers and for our manufacturers. If you think we can help you with a product line in the Midwest, look no further than CBM. Find us right here at cbmrep.com. So you have a couple of legacies since you've taken over the helm, what was that, 2010, 2011?
Yeah, 2011 is when I did it, ISG. We bought ISG Technology and became the CEO of that one. My dad was still CEO of Twin Valley.
Okay.
So I kind of had dual roles there. And then
you were back to the company, but your dad was in charge. Okay.
Yep. And then 2014 is when dad retired and took over to Twin Valley.
Okay. And then what year you guys purchased SKT?
I'm awful with years. But yes, it was 20. I think it's 2021 that we
2021.
purchased them. Yeah,
They were also a family-owned company, if I'm correct?
yeah, they were.
Okay.
Yep.
What was there a challenge there bringing two family-owned companies together because it was different families, or was it easier because it was still that same mentality?
I mean, it was easier.
Yeah.
I mean, like we knew the Mikesell family from like I said, when I was a little kid running around like in the state association meetings. I mean, like they were there, and grandparents that were friends, together. So we were very aware, and Kendall is who I'd known the best after I came back, and he was doing a lot of leadership on the legislative and regulatory front. So we got a chance to interact with him some. And so it was just really clear, that they cared about their people and had this very, very similar cultures to us.
So it was never a question of if, it was just how do we make it work?
Yeah. I mean, I tried to. I talked to Kendall a few years before that, saying if they were, I could see that his kids had different interests and they weren't going to come back and work, And so I was like, hey, if you're ever going to think about selling, we'd be interested in talking to you, about that. And they thought, the best thing for them was more to run a process, that they did. So we did they ran kind of a private process and invited different companies that they felt comfortable with to participate in that. And we were fortunate to be successful there.
Awesome. So what did that do in terms of size of your network? How did it impact it?
It almost, so we had a few more customers than they did. I think we started CLECing a bit more aggressively than SKT had. Of course, Kendall was kind of coming toward the end of his investment cycle, so they were starting to kind of be a little bit more conservative with their spending. So I think they were about 40%, 35 to 40% of our size. So we grew by about a third or a little bit more. But we really liked their network from a perspective that it was outside of Wichita. So again, just thinking long term, Wichita is expanding, and so we wanted to kind of have some network on the south side of Wichita. So as the city
proximity
grew,
there,
we'd build that in there. We didn't have any place, because we're obviously in north central Kansas. We just didn't have any kind of natural growth areas that were ever going to get to our territories. So being able to have the SKT territory in that part of Wichita was really exciting.
So, starting a business is one thing, running a business is another thing, acquiring another business is a whole nother level. What gave you that confidence to be able to, put a deal like that together?
There's a lot. I mean, there's actually a few things. I mean, like we had developed. So I will start with the values. Like I did know some of the people there. Like Bill McVeigh is. Had been a colleague of mine on the Kansas Fiber Network board for a long time. I'd really enjoy it working with Bill. He's incredibly smart, very gracious with his knowledge, and just really liked working with him. So he liked working there. Obviously, he worked there for a very long time. So I knew their staff was really solid, and they had some capabilities that we didn't have or that we needed to hit our growth goals. So just from a like the fit from the management team, I felt really good, about that. The second thing is that we had gone. Have you heard of EOS before? It's called Entrepreneurial Operating System. It's just kind of a way of formalizing in some ways. It's the way that we probably all you guys run your company and we do ours, just a little bit more formalized.
Okay.
But what the thing it did for us is it really helped us develop a longer term picture about like what Twin Valley needed to look like. What were what were our financial objectives? 3 years from now, what's that look like? Both in terms of what the financials are, and then the things that we need to change to hit those goals. So it puts it out there really clearly. So whenever you start talking to another company like SKT that might become part of yours, everybody's got a question like, what are you trying to accomplish? And you can give them the standard kind of stuff that's not clear. It's not really well thought out. It's not supported. And I think there's a lot of times that builds anxiety in people, because they're not sure. Why'd you buy us? And so just having that having gone through what that picture looked like and what the why was, when we started talking to the company in general, they knew exactly what we wanted to do. They knew exactly. So whenever they started seeing changes get introduced, it made it much easier to tell them why and see how they would fit into it. So I would say like that was a big part of it. One thing that I would suggest this all the time. I wish I had engineered this on purpose, but we had a big backlog of customers. We started selecting Junction City. And so whenever you're the acquirer, there's always just a little bit of anxiety, about I'm losing control. Somebody else is going to have new control. It's going to be a big change, right?
Yeah.
We had a backlog and we were struggling a little bit getting orders, done on time with our customers. We brought up about 3 or 4 of their technicians to kind of work for a week up in Junction City, and it lasted much longer than a week, probably more like a month or 2 months. And they helped us out. So all of a sudden they saw that they had, they got a purpose, they helped, being able to help the acquirer accomplish, kind of their goal was, made a huge step in just kind of saying, okay, we're all one team now.
Yeah.
We're all one family. So
an opportunity to show their value.
That's right.
And chip in.
Yeah, they did a great job. And so it eliminated a bunch of misconceptions that people are going to have that they invent in their own heads by just putting it in real life and seeing that that's not true.
What do you think is what do you think is one of the biggest mistakes that is made when merging or buying another company? Yeah, what do you think is the most common?
Well, values is one everybody will tell you, and it's true. I believe in that. The second one is just being clear what your why is. Like, what is that? What does it look like 3 years from now?
Yeah.
And having that be very well developed, so that you could communicate that to the other company, to your company. Your company and the other company. But if you don't, there's a lot of people that you can rationalize anything, right? I could rationalize why CBM ought to be part of Twin Valley, or why we should go buy a construction company,
maybe.
Yeah, but you can rationalize anything,
sure.
And so but if you really start thinking about it, and you really start challenging some of those assumptions, you can see. If I wanted to buy a construction company, for example, it'd be like, okay, so why am I doing that again? Like just to save money for me, potentially, or get my projects done on time. What's that look like financially for the construction company? Like you spend all this money to buy them, and then you're going to give yourself a discount, on what that is. So I think a lot of times, there's these things that people do to solve problems, and that's usually not a very good reason to acquire a company. I think it's more about is there actual synergy there, that you can gain from to hit something that you couldn't do on your own, later on.
So I understand you were recently appointed to chair of the board for, is it NTCA?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
So how does that impact your life now?
I got really busy when Shirley decided to retire. We had to find another leader that was out there, and so the board recognized just how big of a role and how important of a role that was to the entire industry. Just by the nature of Shirley. Shirley made that role important because she was so impactful.
Yeah.
To everybody. So we knew obviously, that we had a great internal candidate in Mike Romano. Shirley had groomed him, and Mike had wanted to be able to be in a position to serve the industry in that type of role themselves. So they had already kind of created a great, I'll say safety net. It was going to be hard to screw it up, right? That was very nice to have going into the process. At the same time, whenever you have somebody that there's a transition, where and you start thinking about just the industry and competition, we're going into now an era where the entire industry and some of our regulatory regime is based on scarcity, scarcity of the network and scarcity of people that would have access to it. And now, with LEOs, there's at least the perception, that some of that scarcity is being solved. That part's not even just perception. It is solving some of that scarcity, right?
But there's still some limitations.
There's some major limitations that, I think some of the policymakers are still they would love for it to be what they want it to be, but it's
Yeah.
not there yet,
Yeah.
and maybe it won't ever get there. So there's still those limitations there, but it has it's changed the conversation, significantly, and it's going to change the role that NTCA can play in how we best serve our membership. So the board recognized there's the industry and the regulatory regime, even the role of Congress and the White House is dramatically different. I mean, the administration now, this current one and potentially the future ones, have a lot more impact, on policy making compared to Congress has. And so is that a short-term thing? Is that a long-term thing? And so the board just thought, there's a lot of questions, that now we have this transition time that we wanted to answer. And one of the ways we wanted to do that was by just opening up the process, to a lot of other candidates. That's why we ran an open process versus just, making that decision with Mike. So putting together a process with, 12 other directors from across the country, one in Alaska, on how you're going to, go through and hire someone to take Shirley's spot took a lot of planning, a lot of coordination, a lot of discussion. So it was, we went through it, and there was a lot of just trips back to Washington, D.C. to interview people, and coordination with the hiring committee and our recruiter and all those different things. So that was incredibly rewarding and pressure packed period. But I saw the board really grow in a way that's, I think, is going to serve the industry and serve NTCA, much, much better into the future. Yeah.
So for some folks that may be watching that don't know, talk about what does the organization do for a company like Twin Valley?
Yeah. So, first and foremost is really just continue to make the case for why our customers need connectivity to the network in order for our communities to be economically viable into the future, and why that's important. That's the number one thing that we have done and has been most important that our companies can't do on their own, right? Second one is, and I think this is starting to emerge a little bit, is how can we start to be more of a convener of, kind of thought leaders and partners that are out there that are thought leaders about how we can start to take control more of our own destiny. There's going to be limitations, of what NTCA can accomplish. There's going to be external factors like we just talked about, some of the LEOs and now private equity and the tremendous amount of private investment that's coming in and the competition that is meaning for our members. So, we're now trying to figure out ways to play more of a business support model and bring in experts and resources and partners to kind of introduce options, to our membership to reduce the reliance on government support or regulatory support in that area. So I'd say those are two of the big focus areas for us. And then it's about, kind of, can we start partnering with some other type of industries like the not Kansas Farm Bureau, but like the National Farm Bureau, kind of organizations or larger national agricultural organizations to build alliances. Mm-hmm. To start advocating for, it's not just about broadband. It's about our rural America, and all the different things it takes to make rural America work, which is, if rural America doesn't work, the country doesn't work very well. And so there's a lot of just how do we start reaching out to other groups to, make a holistic message instead of just being kind of narrowly focused on broadband.
Well, there is a big movement, and there's so much technology going on in the ag market now too. How does that market correlate with your market? How do those two industries work together?
I think it's not been fully utilized yet, really. I think obviously, just look at how they're, if you go out to the golf course, you're seeing robots mowing golf courses now, and then when you I haven't been in one of these brand new combines, but I hear stories from my friends that own them, and they're ultimately autonomous robots that we can take control of if we need to or want to. Yeah. It's just all of that stuff is going to start running on, technology, and obviously requires infrastructure, to do so. so like that is going to continue to evolve and become more efficient. But I mean, the amount of data that people it's not just about physically harvesting the crops or planting them or whatever. It's also about, what's all the big data,
all the
in terms
reports.
of making the inputs more efficient, the harvest, have a greater yield. I mean, it's all those different things. So I think just ensuring that rural America and our agricultural producers in particular have access to that is important. But again, it's not just about that. We have to have schools to have farmers. In these areas, we have to have communities that can support, be self-sustaining, so that we can even get access to that kind of stuff. So it's healthcare. You'll hear a lot more, I think, of us talking about not just broadband. We have to continue to talk about that. But what's broadband? Why?
What it does.
What it does. I mean, and for us, for rural America, it's really got to be about agriculture, healthcare, and education. That's kind of what it enables.
So one of your customers in rural Kansas, that's the benefit for all of this funding. So whether it's healthcare, education,
starting your own business.
Yeah. You mentioned something there about private equity, and I saw an Instagram post from, I don't know the person, but one of your employees, and it let me read it. I want to make sure I get it right. Some networks are built to sell, and Twin Valley is built to last. What does that mean to you?
Well, look, I have friends in private equity, so I don't think it's not necessarily a good or bad thing. It just it is what it is thing.
Sure.
People that invest in private equity, many of them are there for a return on their investment, and that's just kind of the full stop, the end of their story. That's why they're there, right? So when you see any industry pop up, when all of a sudden there's grant dollars available. I've seen this before, and I'll take just brief sideways, but like or a tangent here. But like in Clay Center, we had some grant money that came up from the USDA for housing, affordable housing, and private equity group came in there and built these slab homes. They looked good for about 5 years, and then things started to fall apart. But that group was they'd already sold. They were on down the road. Okay? Yeah. So, and why wouldn't you do that? If you're in it solely,
if you're in it for financials, then
that's what it is. Yeah. I'm not saying it's bad.
Yeah.
But I think when you're a policymaker, I think our policymakers are failing to take that into account the full way that they should. And so when we just want to highlight, not just for policymakers, but for our customers. I mean, like there's been competitors that have come in, and I mean they're not getting contractors that are doing locates. They're putting their networks like that deep underneath it's just really not quality work, that's built to last. And so we and you probably know this. I mean, the industry talks about it, So instead of like complaining about it, we just want to make sure people are all aware. It just is. There's just differences, there. And if you're a business that needs to stay up, and you're running a hospital or a critical care facility, there's going to be differences in reliability there based on how the networks get constructed. And so you
never know what's being transported. I remember years ago, I was a splicer for McLeod way back in the day, and I can remember we were doing a cutover one night in Des Moines, and there's a knock on the door of the trailer, and it's Sheriff. What are you boys doing?
That's like the third time. For the third time,
we knocked the 911 down. 911 service was down. We missed it on all of the planning. It was missed that circuit was on there, and like he's at our door, like get this up now.
Yes.
You never know what could be. What can be affected by that. So the other point too. I guess is. It's different when that's your own backyard.
Yeah.
You feel differently about how you want to take care of that being your home, your neighbors, et cetera, versus, just a percentage point, if you will.
That's that's another part that I think the policymakers miss is that they think the customer service that we have is too expensive. Some of them do. Most of them, a lot of them don't. They do get it. But when you look at our penetration rates for the NTCA membership, they're dramatically higher than anybody else that's serving rural America. Starlink is asked for a waiver. They want waivers to have professional installation. That we do all the time.
Yeah.
For to get around some of the requirements of the BEAD funding. We have much higher penetration because we go the extra mile to help our elderly, help the ones that need extra help in rural America to get connected to the internet. So it's not just about the network and building that stuff out there. You have to have people that care about making it easy to get people that might have difficulty to get onto the network and see how they can help use it and benefit from it. So without that, you're wasting the public dollars. You're building really nice networks to go past people that are still not taking advantage of that network.
Yeah. We had Green Hills Telephone on here recently, and I know they had a program where they were doing, public Wi-Fi in some of their towns to parks and schools and, different places like that. Are you doing similar type of work?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a really cool idea that's going on in Tennessee. One of my good friends, Jonathan West, is on the board with me actually at NTCA is part of a group that they've started this what they're called Tri-Lite mobile. So it's an MVNO, and we're an MVNO, so we can provide mobile devices and service via we use the Verizon network to our customers. They're rebranding that. In fact, and I think they're even using that brand. So they're using the same brand for all of their different cooperatives. Okay. So I think they'll happen to be cooperatives. They're also using that for their community Wi-Fi. So they're starting to build this kind of like statewide brand of Tri-Lite, both on community Wi-Fi and with their mobile service. That I think is really kind of exciting.
Yeah, that's cool
to do. Because I think there's some opportunities for our industry to think larger like that, to really help provide a national kind of brand or certification that really does highlight the differences between NTCA members, who I think do the best job, and all the competition that's out there. So there's a lot of things that are very creative that are out there. So we want to, of course, we're going to do those. We're doing the MVNO. We've started community Wi-Fi. But I think that's not the end point. That's just kind of the starting point.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to seeing the impact you have over the next few years.
Yeah.
With that, before we wrap up, any message or anything you want to say to your team while we got you here?
Oh man! Well, so the Twin Valley team. If there's anybody that makes me feel kind of irrelevant, it's the Twin Valley team. Like I keep thinking that they need me to do something, and by the time we get on, kind of annual calls about like where are we going or whatever, they're setting the bar, with that's out there. The one thing that I want to share that they're working on and doing is around creating kind of these exponential concepts using AI to for our company and how we work. So we're talking about how do we keep the same service that we're known for having, and also enabling people in the community that care so much about their neighbors, just like we do, help support that. So an example could be, right now we have, our technicians that are trained to handle all the problems, right?
Yeah.
They got trucks and tools and all the different things to go out there. And sometimes we cover 6,000 square miles, which is like the size of Connecticut, so it's a big area. So sometimes we'll send a technician an hour and a half to go take care of a router reset for a customer or something like that. Obviously we try to avoid that, but sometimes you can't. What if there's somebody in the community that we just go ahead and pay, $100 to $200, whatever, to take care of that problem, for them with their neighbor that they already might be their plumber or their electrician or whatever. They already know that person that's there. So there's going to be, I think, for us to stay relevant and be competitive, with the competition that's coming through. They're charging $35 for 500 megs, or they're all being very aggressive on price now because their service is not particularly good. So they have to be very aggressive on price. the team is starting to come up with all these experiments, on how do we become much more efficient, not like 5% more efficient or 10% more efficient, but like 50% more efficient in different areas. So I'm really excited. We've got a lot of traction there in what they're doing. So I just kind of get out of the way, when they start running these experiments and kind of cheerlead them and things like that. But some of the things they're doing are really exciting. Yeah,
well, and obviously when they have that much input into the process, they're going to buy into it way more than if it's downhill. So that's awesome. Yep. So I can't thank you enough for spending some time with us today. It was great to meet you and enjoyed the heck out of talking with you. So it's been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You guys, I've been fortunate to watch your guys' podcast and what you do for the industry, but CBM and this podcast, it just continues to, you guys are looking for ways to add value. So appreciate you guys doing what you are.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim.
All right. Just wanted to say thanks again to Ben for joining us. We really appreciate him spending some time with us this morning. It was great for me to get to know him a little bit better. So thank you, and I appreciate everything that we're able to do with Twin Valley over the years. Remember, if you need help with a project or looking for representation here in the Midwest, look no further than CBM. You can find us at cbmrep.com. Appreciate you watching Power of the Network, and until next time, we'll see you next time.